crime fiction is a genre that has been consistently appealing over the course of the past 70 years or so. In the West, crime fiction will typically fall into either contemporary urban crime or mafia or otherwise organized crime. A certain novel named The Godfather from 1969 and its film adaptation from 1972 comprise the bar every piece of written or filmed crime fiction has to reach in order to achieve masterpiece status, and as such, very few products ever have. Within the video game sphere, there are amazing pieces of crime fiction as well, with Grand Theft Auto Vice City and San Andreas coming to mind. And while I do think these games are in tune with the Godfather barometer, narratively they don't match the overall quality of that seminal piece. As a result of the cool Japan strategy's success, Japanese media has begun to proliferate mass media culture in the West. And it is through this cultural conflagration the Yakuza franchise that has since been rebranded to Like a Dragon rose in popularity here in the States. My first interaction with the Yakuza franchise was seeing the PS2 original on shelves at various GameStops and other used video game shops. But I never picked it up, and at the time I wasn't really interested. A crime game needed to be open world in the same way Vice City and San Andreas was, or at least that's the opinion elementary and middle school me held. In my past self's defense, open world games were still unique and novel at the time, and the modern exhaustion towards these types of games was still a decade or so away from beginning to develop. I would cross paths with the Yakuza franchise in small ways over the course of my life since, having gotten Yakuza Kiwami as a PS Plus game in 2019, and picking up Yakuza Like a Dragon at the recommendation of Rosie Caddick from PlayStation Access. And it's really because of Rosie's passion for the Yakuza franchise that I've been interested in diving deep into this franchise for some time, something I finally got around to doing during my year of Yakuza. This year, I set out to play every single mainline Yakuza game, adding the 2 Judgment titles to my list to round out the list to a perfect 12, one for each month of the year. The first game for the year is Yakuza Zero, and upon finishing it, there was only one conclusion I could make. Yakuza Zero is the godfather of Japanese games. Japan and the US, Ryuga Gotoku and Rockstar, and the East and the West are vastly different in terms of culture, writing, and game design. And as such, there's a certain level of cultural dissonance between me, a Western player, and RGG Studios' work than I have with something incredibly Western, like The Godfather. Despite that cultural dissonance, Yakuza Zero managed to craft a crime story to rival the best in the entire genre across all media forms. And in this Rayl Deal review, I'll explain why. I'll be splitting this review into 2 major parts, a spoiler-free section and a spoiler discussion section. The spoiler-free section will focus exclusively on the first few hours of game time, and there will be a clearly labeled spoiler warning before I get into the spoiler territory of the review. And I'll give you all enough time to click away if you so choose. With that intro out of the way, you're watching Rayl Deal Games, and let's dive right in. The intro cutscene is a lost art form in more modern games because a lot of developers don't seem to really pay any special attention to its design. Maybe it is because I grew up playing Mortal Kombat Deception, Shaolin Monks, and Armageddon, but I find intros to be an important part in getting the player pumped for a gaming session. I usually launch a game and then go into my kitchen to pick out something to drink, and by the time I get back to my couch, the intro cinematic to whichever game I'm playing will be droning away on the TV. Over time, the intro begins to foreshadow my game playing experience, and I get more pumped to play the game. And as such, these intro cinematics frame my experience playing a game in significant, albeit subtle, ways. Think about it this way. Whenever watching anime, what makes you watch the intro for every single episode? The combination of animation, music, and editing all come together to craft an experience that serves as the perfect prelude to the watching of the anime itself. Cowboy Bebop, Outlaw Star, Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, Yu Yu Hakusho, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and so many more all have these intros that are sacrilegious to skip. Yakuza Zero has a perfect intro cinematic, and I would sometimes find myself watching it all the way through before formally starting my game session. It does everything the best anime openings do by pairing great music with an overview of major plot points without enough context included to count them as spoilers. Just like with the anime intros, I would find myself looking for the events from the intro in the game itself, and each time I became a real-life parody of Leonardo DiCaprio from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I hope the rest of the franchise has cinematics of this caliber in terms of quality. The Godfather is loaded with iconic shots, and the wedding scene from the beginning of the film is a great example of this. It is in this sequence of scenes the viewer is introduced to the way Coppola pairs music and choreography, and music serves as a dynamic backdrop to many of the scenes throughout the movie. In Yakuza 0, music is more subtle, but it is no less a part of the game. Music serves Kiryu and Majima, the main characters of the game, as a distraction from the sordid realities of Yakuza life, forming a stark contrast with the synthesis of music and drama present throughout the crime genre. The Judgment karaoke bit from the early sections of the game demonstrates this shift in dramatic design. I'm not saying Yakuza 0 doesn't pair music to its story, but the music is more iconic in these entertainment sections. It's the difference between listening to music on the radio while driving and lounging back after a hard day's work to listen to your favorite track. One is atmospheric and holds no more place in your memory than white noise, and the other is where joy is paired with sound, each secreting dopamine in spades. There's an intentional design to each's approach to the implementation of music. In The Godfather, music serves to add a theme to a scene, whereas the music in Yakuza 0 serves to mark the end to the action, bringing a level of calmness to the looming conflicts of the game. The story premise of a piece of crime fiction is severely important. In The Godfather, it's established that Vito Corleone is the patriarch of his family, and he operates on a system of favors to local community members.
That I cannot do.
I'll give you anything you ask.
We've known each other many years, but this is the first time you ever came to me for counsel, for help. I can't remember the last time that you invited me to your house for a cup of coffee. Even though my wife is godmother to your only child.
This framework provides the skeleton for the political intrigue regarding the machinations and maneuvering of the five families. Yakuza 0 mirrors this approach expertly. The player is first introduced to Kiryu right after he's committed a serious beatdown on someone who defaulted on their loan payments. This dark corner of Kamurocho serves as the crux of Yakuza 0's main plot, much in the same way the opening shot of Vito and his interactions sets the strong familial structure of his crime syndicate and community connections. While Vito is the head of his family, Kiryu is the foot of his, doing the rough work to bring honor to the Kazama name. As such, the crux of Yakuza 0's story is its focus on the power dynamics of the Yakuza through the interactions between the Tojo clan, Omi Alliance, and Nikyo Consortium. Is Kiryu innocent? What does this mean for Kazama's captain's seat under Dojima? These are the questions the player is confronted with right from the start, and creating this type of curiosity is important for any work, but it is especially important in works with complex systems of political intrigue. Consider the wedding scene of The Godfather once again. In this scene, the primary antagonist of the film, Barzini, is shown, and it is clear from the way he doesn't allow his picture to be taken that he is deep in the organized crime world. Someone watching The Godfather for the first time wouldn't even need to know Barzini would be a key figure in the conflicts to come, and it adds to the genius of The Godfather that there is something to be gained through multiple rewatches of the film. Yakuza 0 has an inverse relationship with the player base of its franchise. Technically, it is the sixth game in the franchise, although it functions as a prequel to the first game. Longtime fans of the franchise would already know about the distribution of power in the Yakuza world and of the machinations of the crime syndicates competing for more influence. In this way, Yakuza 0 matches the rewatchability of The Godfather in that it allows longtime fans to get something more from the Yakuza experience, through the way the game builds up Kiryu, Nishikiyama, Majima, Dojima, and others. I can only guess at what this game means to longtime fans, but the fan reception of the game is a good indicator of how well it's liked. By fans in the franchise, it seems to be almost unanimously picked as the best Yakuza game to date. Now, I didn't look too deep into this because I'm trying to avoid spoilers of the other games, so please let me know in the comments below if I'm wrong on this point. What I can comment on with absolute authority is the new player experience. I've only played bits and pieces of Ishin, Like a Dragon, and Kiwami before playing this game, and the time frame with each of those never exceeded 2 hours. The Yakuza franchise is a daunting one to dive into, as Ralph from Skill Up has said multiple times. The story in Zero grabbed my attention right from the start because it takes an innocuous idea, the murder at an empty lot, and transforms it into this crime organization spanning conflict of multiple families and syndicates. It shows from the start what crime organizations will do sometimes to make their actions appear on paper as legal, something I'll explain more in depth in the spoiler section of the video. All I can say right now in the spoiler-free section of this video is that if you are like me and you've not gotten around to this franchise because of its size, Yakuza Zero's story will hook you from the start, and it will continue to satisfy for the whole experience. A great story is good, but if there is one thing more important in a game than story, it's gameplay. And Yakuza Zero's gameplay is pretty damn good. Zero is a 3D brawler open zone game with immersive sim elements. Combat encounters are done in these closed off areas, and upon completing a fight, the player is returned to the open zone. What makes these fights in Yakuza Zero so fun is the way the player is introduced to each character's fighting styles. There are two playable protagonists of the game, as is apparent from the case's cover art, and each have wildly different styles of gameplay, each having 3 unique fighting styles to switch between. Kiryu gets the brawler, rush, and beast styles, whereas Majima gets the thug, slugger, and breaker styles. How do you unlock these styles? Through the critical path of the story, both Kiryu and Majima will unlock these styles naturally by watching a master of the style dunk on some poor soul, copying it right afterwards. These sections made me laugh because Kiryu will declare, "That's rad," before copying the style, and Majima will exclaim,
Holy shit.
before doing so. The first time it happened, I was surprised at how out of place the scene was, and it easily solicited a chuckle from me as a result. Kiryu's style of fighting focuses more on counterpicking the enemies in the game alongside utilizing the items in the environment to their full effect. Since Kiryu's styles primarily differ in terms of speed, switching between them is more a matter of matching the combat scenario at hand, something that matters the most in the final boss fight, which I won't spoil here. Just make sure you're upgrading each of Kiryu's 3 styles over the course of the game, otherwise you might regret it at the end. Kiryu uses the items in the environment much more fluidly than Majima, and this is primarily because of his beast mode. In this mode, Kiryu can equip and swing an environmental object with just one press of the square button, something that is a 2-step process in any other fighting style. This is balanced because of the way the beast style is so slow. Lumbering around like a hulking mass, this style falls prey to quicker enemy types and to enemies that like to use fast stunning strikes. I loved using this style the most when there was a group around because it is so satisfying to hit them all with a motorcycle at the same time. The brawler style isn't bad, but it would be the one I used only if the other 2 styles weren't useful at any given moment. This style felt most like the average basic 3D brawler style, and I'm guessing that's why it's named the way it is. My favorite of Kiryu's styles is the rush style. I use this one the most because I found it to be the most effective way of dealing out moderate amounts of damage without any risk of getting hit on the crackback. With enough strikes, the enemy is even stunned for a time, which provides the player the perfect opportunity to dish in with a heat action. These 3 styles make Kiryu a fun character for sure, but I would say the instant I was introduced to Majima, I loathed returning to Kiryu for anything except the progression of this game's amazing story. Majima's first style, the Thug, mirrors Kiryu's brawler style in a lot of ways. It's the box standard 3D brawler framework, except in Majima's case, I found this style to be more satisfying. I can't really articulate why that is, but there is something about the difference between the 2 styles that made Majima's more enjoyable to use. That being said, I used this style the least out of Majima's available ones. I used the slugger style moderately with Majima. It was at the point I got this style that I realized Majima wasn't going to utilize his environment near as much as Kiryu does, and this really adds to Majima's mythos. He doesn't need to pick things up because he always has a weapon handy. He's unpredictable, as shown by the way he'll sling the Louisville Slugger around as if it were a nunchuck. And he's brutal, as shown by his heat actions in this style. He is a terror, and I like the way Majima's styles make him a foil to Kiryu. In different circumstances, they could have been brothers, and their fighting styles would have been similar. But for spoiler plot reasons, Majima is a perversion of Kiryu's honorable and more traditional fighting styles. My favorite, the fan favorite, and your future favorite fighting style is Breaker. In this style, Majima becomes an attack helicopter, specifically the helicopter's blades, of death, beyblading around the arena and creating a miasma of murder in his wake. The premise of this style is as simple as it is silly. Majima watches a group of breakdancers competing, and he decides that the most obvious application of their dancing skill is to demonstrate his dominance over the other, lesser, plebeian enemies of the game by turning their fights into a dance competition, the losing of which means death. As the player levels up each style, they get to unlock special abilities by training with the master of each style. In the Breaker style, the player can unlock Blade Bite, where Majima can use a heat action to disarm an opponent and send their weapon right into their gut. This move matches the crazy, insane fighting style of Majima perfectly, and I hope things like this come up in Majima's future franchise appearances. I can't express how broken this style is. It is so easy to lock 6 or more enemies into a corner and then begin breakdancing all over those sorry fools. And it's primarily because of the style I never wanted to go back to Kiryu. There's one element of the combat I didn't mention up until this point, but despite being a small thing, it matters a lot. Enemies explode in a confetti of money when they are being hit, and this little feature is so genius. You see, Yakuza 0 doesn't have experience points. You spend money to do everything in the open zone, but in addition to this, you've got to spend money to upgrade your skills. This system is similar to the Soul system in Dark Souls as a result. The piñata nature of the enemies triggers the dopamine receptors in the player's brain so much and so often. I really hope this is a feature in more games of the franchise. I don't think the combat would feel right without it. Combat in games matters a lot, and small touches like this add a lot to the overall experience of the game. When Majima learns to let it rip, his Beyblading breakdancing makes the entire combat arena twinkle with the jingle jangle of a casino's mythical jackpot finally being hit. Each enemy becomes a slot machine, and each slot machine always spins 777s. I've played over 1,000 games, and this one little feature made the combat in Yakuza 0 more enjoyable than 80% of them. Even with that in mind, I don't think Yakuza 0 would be something I would rave about if it weren't for the way the open zone design of the game complements and enhances the story premise and combat. I've been using the words open zone instead of open world to explain the design of this game's playable space, and it is at this point that I should explain the difference between the two. The core difference between the two is one of scale. Open worlds are larger, more expansive, and allow the player to go in any conceivable direction right from the start. Open zones are a little different. They also allow the player to explore, but they are also smaller and usually have linear sections that separate the larger explorable areas of the game. A few good examples of this would be Metal Gear Solid 5 and Dragon's Dogma. It's not bad for a game to be open zone, and to be honest with you, Kamurocho is a far more memorable world because of its reduced size. There's a personality in Kamurocho that isn't present in a lot of other game worlds, and I think it comes down to the activities within the explorable space. Kamurocho is full of minigames, food places, and shops, and each serves an important purpose and is tonally consistent with the rest of the city. Minigames are a part of games that have started to disappear over the past 10 years, and it was refreshing to come across them in this game. I didn't even do all of them, but I would have if I didn't have 11 more Yakuza games in waiting. A lot of my exploration of Kamurocho was restricted by the nature of how I don't want to get burned out on the Yakuza gameplay loop too early. I didn't do much karaoke, but when I did it, I loved it. And this is true of all of the minigames in Yakuza 0. I honestly would love to go back to this game for the platinum at some point, and I might just do that if I have time after finishing Infinite Wealth. I'll be spending a lot of time in Kamurocho this year, and I'm sure I'll have more to say about these activities by the end. Doing these activities and eating at shops is further enhanced by the reward system Yakuza 0 has. Each action in the game, if done enough times, seeds completion points or CP, and this CP is spent at shrines to improve Kiryu and Majima's abilities. This ranges from allowing them to sprint for longer before needing to take a break, or earning more money from fights. This is where the immersive sims elements of this game come to shine. A lot of time, immersive sim elements in games provide the player with activities in the game to immerse them in the world, but they don't actually give the player any reason to do so beyond immersion. Yakuza 0 makes these activities an integral part of the game playing experience, and that makes Kamurocho a more immersive gameplay-centric space. I wish more games made progressive progression systems like the one in this game. Sotenbori is much the same as Kamurocho, albeit a little smaller. It is by walking down these neon streets that the player will encounter the roving bands of punks, drunks, and yakuza. This is where the combat happens, and while there isn't anything special about the random encounters, there is one random encounter that is special: Mr. Shakedown. Sometimes in the world you'll come across this larger than typical guy that has a number over his head. This is Mr. Shakedown, and the way this guy works is that if you fight him and win, you'll get whatever lump sum of money shows up over his head, but losing will make you lose whatever cash you had on you. This is a pretty cool risk reward system, and I found myself challenging Mr. Shakedown most times I encountered him. I once lost 19 million yen to him, and I like punishing aspects of game design like this. Most of the time I beat him though, so the scales always tipped in my favor. As you beat him, he gets stronger, and the amount of money he's likely to be carrying around increases. Mr. Shakedown is the primary reason my Kiryu was severely weaker than my Majima. I don't really know how Mr. Shakedown encounter rates work, and it might be because of Sotenbori's reduced size, but I encountered him way more often with Majima, and this meant I had more money to use on Majima's skills. One time I beat him when he had nearly 1 billion yen on him, and I purchased somewhere between 10 and 11 abilities after that fight. Mr. Shakedown is especially fun to beat up because some versions of him look like an Asian Andrew Tate, and I loved taking that particular character model's money. With Kiryu, I only encountered him twice or thrice, and one of these times I didn't win, so I was just more strapped for cash with that character. That being said, this isn't a complaint. I didn't engage with the business management minigames all too much, and if I had, I don't think I would have been so low on yen with Kiryu. I don't mind when I get punished for my own decisions in a game, and since I plan to go back to this title at some point, I don't have any FOMO to speak of. I missed a lot of side stories this playthrough, but I also don't mourn missing those either. I'll be getting around to them when I do my Legend run of this game. And with that, this is the end of the spoiler-free section of the review. If you liked what you heard, play the game and come back for the spoiler discussion. You're going to love the game, and I look forward to chatting with you about it sometime. With that, let's take a look at the side story design of this game. I find most side quests in games to be dull. They involve talking to someone, doing something really quick, and then being thanked for doing that thing. I've grown to see side quests as a barrier to progression in a lot of games. With writing so bad, I usually just skip the dialogue. I might have done that in this game too, except for the fact I plan to review it. Since I knew I was going to review this game, I knew I would need to see if the quests were worthwhile. My conclusion became clear after the first few side stories. The side story design in Yakuza 0 is god tier, and it is entirely because of the writing. Even though we're in the spoiler section of the video, I don't want to spoil all of the ones I did, so I'll just focus on my favorite 2 quests. My favorite quest was the How to Train Your Dominatrix quest, which caught my attention at the start because of the title. I might be looking too deep into this, but this quest's title seems like a subtle reference to the How to Train Your Dragon movie series. Ayu is a dominatrix that fails to meet her customers' expectations, and as such, she asks you for advice on how to degrade her clients. I like the way this quest is so uniquely different from anything I've ever experienced right from the jump, and it attests to the writers at RGG that this quest made Ayu one of my favorite characters in the game. You see, Ayu is a shy girl, a girl who is constantly taken advantage of by people in her life, and she took this job as a BDSM girl to learn how to make genuine friendships and to stick up for herself. I love the way the writers mixed in some heartfelt moments with Ayu over the course of the quest line and paired that with some genuinely funny moments. There's this part of the quest where these children walk up to see what Kiryu and Ayu are doing, and it's turned into a lesson by Kiryu to teach Ayu how to utilize public shaming to meet her clients' needs. This comes back around by the end of the quest where Kiryu is the onlooker as Ayu verbally abuses her consenting client. At the end, Ayu becomes good at her job, and I additionally like this quest for the way it deconstructs stereotypical depictions of sex workers. My second favorite side story is one where this foreign woman needs something from Kiryu, but she doesn't speak Japanese so well, which causes us to go on this quest line for pizza when she actually needed a work visa. The insanity of this questline is more on the humor side, and my favorite frame of it is when the delivery pizza man watches the interaction between the foreign woman, Kiryu, and her pimp play out with a deadpan expression on his face. These quests set the backdrop of Kamurocho, reframing its debased nature in a way that pairs the human condition with humor, and writing these types of quests just is not a simple thing to do right. RGG's writers pulled it off though, and I'm excited to dive deeper into these on my second playthrough sometime in the future. Yakuza Zero's story is pretty complex, with a lot of moving parts, and since I don't do this for a living, I don't have the time to explain the complete complexity of the story in depth. Instead, I'm going to focus on the parts that most stood out to me over the course of my playthrough. Once that story is summarized, I'll be able to better explain in detail my impressions of each character, and the Dragon of Dojima, and the Mad Dog of Shimano. Picking up from where the first story section of this review left off, the Empty Lot creates the main narrative framework for this game. Everyone is interested in the Empty Lot because it is the last section of land necessary before the Tojo clan can start the Kamurocho revitalization project. This focus on trying to gain the property legally using illegal means is like the way Vito got Fontaine out of his contract with his band leader.
My father made him an offer he couldn't refuse.
What was that?
Luca Brazzi held a gun to his head, and my father assured him that either his brains or his signature would be on the contract.
With offers that can't be refused, organized crime hides in plain sight. Kiryu is initially blamed for the crime of the murder that happens there, since it was his collection mark who died. Since Kiryu doesn't use guns though, this is an impossible conclusion, and he begins to work on discovering who actually did the crime. Not only to keep himself out of prison, but also to clear Kazuma of any accountability within the Tojo clan itself. This is where Dojima's 3 lieutenants come in: Kuze, Awano, and Shibusawa. Each is trying to maneuver the Empty Lot frame job in such a way that puts them on top. The prize and purpose for doing so is Kazuma's captain's seat, something they all covet. It was early on in the game where it became obvious the writing in this game matches the quality in something like The Godfather. Let's look at a few lines. Early on in the story, Kuze tries to pin the murder directly on Kiryu so that Kazuma will be shamed out of his captain's seat. He tells Kiryu that he needs to turn himself in, and when he does so, he needs to turn in his pinky as well. Kiryu doesn't do this, instead coming up with a plot to get himself expelled from the Dojima clan. When he goes to Sohei to do this, he's stopped by Kuze, who says, "Your pinky's on your goddamn hand. You're asking to leave and you show up empty-handed?" This was the first line that made me sit back and think, wow, there's some great writing in this game. There's a double meaning to Kuze's line here, in that since the pinky is attached to Kiryu's hand, it makes Kiryu himself empty-handed. The removal of his pinky would make his hand more empty, creating the double meaning. And Yakuza Zero is chock full of interesting lines like this. There's irony in this situation too, since by the end of Kiryu and Kuze's fight, Kuze will have accidentally created a verbal agreement that Kiryu is expelled from the Yakuza, and Sohei Dojima demands Kuze cut off his pinky in recompense for his fuck-up. Kiryu is expelled, yet Kazuma isn't off the hook. He's still accountable for the supposed actions of Kiryu despite the fact that he didn't actually do the crime. This theme of blame and expulsion reminded me instantly of the Sollozzo murder in The Godfather. Sollozzo is killed by Michael, and Michael is forced out of the US as a result. And it is in these situations the dichotomy of civilian and active participant is made manifest. Organized crime doesn't care if it hurts or kills innocents, yet there is a prescription in both the Mafia and Yakuza here about avoiding it as much as necessary. Sohei Dojima doesn't care about Kiryu if he's a civilian, just like how Sollozzo and the 5 families don't care about Michael if he's a civilian. They aren't part of the greater conflict, and as such, they have no bearing on that conflict's greater designs. Kiryu is cast out from this point on, and it is at this point he is put into communication with Tachibana through Oda. As a side note, Oda reminds me of Kakyoin from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, specifically in this scene. Every time I interacted with Oda, this is all I could think of, and as such, I found him funnier than I think was intended by the designers. Working with Oda, Kiryu starts looking for the owner of the Empty Lot, which makes him run afoul of the Dojima family once more. Kuze was disgraced in his last encounter with Kiryu though, and this means Awano takes center stage in hunting down Kiryu. He puts a hit on Kiryu, and it is at this point the down-to-earth nature of Zero's storyline mixes with the oddities of Japanese game design. While in the sewer, Kiryu is attacked by Kuze riding a motorcycle in the sewer with a pipe. Anyway, this is the second of 5 Kuze boss fights, and despite how silly it is, I like the way this scene sets up the rivalry between these two. Throughout this game, there is a consistent trend of Kiryu's enemies slowly crafting him into a stronger Yakuza. Kiryu beats Kuze and pops out of the sewer in a disco club where Awano is waiting for him, dancing with a girl. It was at this point I began to like Awano more. Awano kills the girl, but Kiryu escapes. cast out of Kamurocho completely. This leads eventually to the third Kuze boss fight. As he leaves, Nishiki points a gun at the back of his head. If Nishiki were to kill Kiryu right here, the shame besmirching Kazuma's name would disappear and Nishiki himself would rise through the ranks. But he can't do it. He and Kiryu are brothers, and this scene really contrasts with the start of Kiwami. I've only ever played the first 2 hours of that game, but I like the way Zero builds Nishiki up more, making his betrayal in the sequel more powerful. It is in Sotenbori, Kiryu learns about Tachibana's mixed Chinese-Japanese heritage and the identity of the empty lot's owner, Makoto Makimura, Tachibana's biological sister he hasn't seen in 10 years. And all of this up until this point was all part of Kazuma's design to weaken Dojima's position in the Tojo clan, which is something I saw coming a mile away. It's foreshadowed subtly throughout the game that Kazuma is doing this, and I actually expected this to be revealed sooner. We learn the identity of the empty lot murderer shortly afterward. Kiryu is shot by Lao Gui, and he takes Tachibana prisoner. Kuze has him tortured to learn the identity of Makoto. The torture scene is a little difficult to watch, especially the part where his toes are smushed. That part actually made me cringe a little bit. This scene is capped off with the fourth Kuze boss fight. The Kuze boss fights were honestly a highlight of the Kiryu campaign, and over the course of each of these interactions, he quickly became my favorite antagonist in the game. After fighting him a fifth time, Kiryu is then in a position to fight his final boss, Shibusawa. After beating him, the empty lot conflict is resolved on Kiryu's side, and Dojima is blocked from taking the chairman's seat in the Tojo clan, instead being subverted by Sarah, a character that comes up often in Majima's section. But I actually don't have much to say about him specifically. Now let's set Kiryu aside for a moment and dive into Majima's story. Majima and his brother decided to team up to commit a hit, but Majima is commanded not to by Shimano, his patriarch. The penalty for ignoring his leader's command is that his eye is gouged out and he is tortured for a year straight. After that is done, he is imprisoned in Sotenbori, where he must make 600 million yen for the Shimano family as the manager of the Grand. The scene where Majima is introduced must have created some major whiplash for longtime fans of the franchise, but for me, it framed the character perfectly. I had figured out early on that he was being confined to Sotenbori against his will. Sagawa, Majima's handler, provides Majima an opportunity to get out of his role as manager. All he has to do is kill a mark by the name of Makoto Makimura. Majima has trepidation in regards to this. He doesn't want to kill. This plot point here doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and Kiryu is the same way despite the way he kills all of those guys in the car chase scene. I think it's a Japanese culture thing because heroes just aren't allowed to kill in these Japanese heavy games, or at least they're not allowed to kill if it's not in self-defense. It is perhaps maybe a localization error, but I don't really know, so I can't confirm that one way or the other. That's okay though, I can suspend my disbelief for something like this. Majima goes to a chiropractor shop because that's where he's learned Makoto to be, and when he gets there, he meets a blind girl, who is actually Makoto. Majima doesn't know that yet, instead thinking God Hand Lee is Makoto. They fight, but they are interrupted when other Yakuza come looking for Makoto. Majima learns here about Makoto's real identity, saves her, but is unable to kill her. He learned that Makoto is blind because she is gang raped so much by the Korean mafia that trauma took her sight. As such, she doesn't know what Majima looks like, which will matter later. It was Oda who sold her to the Korean mafia, which he will reveal before being killed by Shibusawa. Makoto is able to recognize him by the sound of his voice, another detail that matters. As Majima tries to get Makoto out of the city with Lee, their getaway car is bugged with a car bomb, and Lee is killed just like Apollonia. I remember I said, "No, Apollonia, no!" as soon as he headed towards the car because I knew where this was going. Eventually, Makoto and Majima end up in Kamurocho, and she gives him the slip to confront Sohei Dojima. When she does so, she is shot, and Majima saves her life by getting her out of there. This is where Majima's mental state starts to become more unhinged, but I'm only establishing story context right now, and I'll be doing a deeper dive on Majima himself in a later section. For revenge, Majima assaults Dojima HQ, and he beats Awano and Lao Gui, with Lao Gui killing Awano. I like this section a lot because of Majima's conversation with Awano. This section closes off Majima's final combat encounter, and in the epilogue, we see him don his clothing from Kiwami. He meets Makoto in the street, saving her from a pair of his underlings, but he does this without saying a word to her. even pulling her doctor aside to talk to him. This is because Majima doesn't want Makoto to know who he is. He wants to let her go. In the post-credits scene, Majima and Kiryu meet, and this is my only criticism of the game. I expected these two characters to meet earlier and for their relationship from Kiwami to be established here. That's not what happened, and instead the game serves as character building for the two separately. I don't want to say this is a missed opportunity at this time, since I haven't played the other games yet though. This was a brief summary of the events of the main quest of Yakuza 0. I did not talk about everything that happened, or this section would have been way longer. I just wanted to lay out these sections briefly to add context to the analyses in the following sections. The characters in Yakuza 0 are what separate it from other games from its era. Think about the best pieces of crime fiction: The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, Goodfellas, and The Godfather. All share great characters coupled with a dynamic story. I'll be touching on Kiryu and Majima separately in later sections, but I want to take a second to break down all of the side characters. The first four I want to bring up are the three Dojima lieutenants and Dojima himself. Hiroki Owano is a unique character in this game because he looks like he fits the 80s time period the best of the Dojima elite. He's given to gluttony and excess comforts, and it is for this reason Kiryu never fights him. Owano would rather solve conflicts without needing to get blood on his suit, because in his quest for the top, he lost the warrior he once was. He is able to keep his contemptuous composure until Majima forces him to resort to fists. Owano's tattoo fits this theme of a warrior who's lost his way quite nicely. He has Momotaro on his back, a character in Japanese folklore who journeys to the island of demons threatening his village to kill them. Momotaro is a hero fighting for the good of the people, but Owano doesn't match this character during the majority of Yakuza 0. He is selfish, greedy, and absorbed in the finer material things in life, having forgotten his warrior outlook years ago. It is only when he's confronted by Majima, who has a hanya, or a type of demon, on his back, that the Momotaro version of Owano returns. He says, "Golf, women, expensive liquors, they're all bullshit. The ink on my back's faded half to hell in the time I've spent lost in the easy life," showing how he knows himself he's lost his way. The way Majima tells Owano that he plans to send his Dojima friends to hell after him makes their conflict mirror the Momotaro folk tale even more. But unlike the folk tale, Owano loses here because he's morally in the wrong between the two. It's an inversion of the classic tale because in this version it is Majima, the demon, who comes to avenge his people, Makoto, by taking down Momotaro and his village, Owano and the Dojima family. Majima states, "A goddamn shame. If you hadn't gotten swept up in the glitz, those fists of yours coulda taken you to the top. You had potential, no doubt." This is the core theme of Owano's story, a hero who lost his potential by leaving the warrior path. This is where Owano says that if he were more like Majima, he could have gotten further in life. And I also think this is the reason he sacrifices himself to save Majima from Lao Gui. It's his redemption for living his life so poorly. And living life poorly is a consistent trend among the Dojima elite, as it continues with the tale of Daisaku Kuze. Much like Owano and Shibusawa, Kuze shoots for the top. His tattoos are demons, and he is up against Kiryu for the whole game. This represents Kiryu's constant fight against the darkness within himself and within the wider Yakuza world. 5 separate times Kuze and Kiryu fight, Kiryu winning each time. When Kiryu beats him for the last time, he says that Kazuma knew Kiryu would become a true Yakuza, and it is the fault of him and the Dojima family that the seal was broken. Kuze's demon tattoo also explains why he is the most conniving of the Dojima elite. He's the only one that tried to handle things quietly with Kiryu, trying to convince Kiryu of going quietly to prison and of helping him work against Kazuma's interests. While these are things Kuze does for his own interest, they also represent conflicts Kiryu was personally going through. He could have accepted his fate and went to prison. He could have turned against Kazuma and maybe worked with the Dojima elite to subvert his adopted father's wishes. But in each occurrence, the honorable Kiryu prevails and fights back against his demons, even if they are speeding at him on a motorcycle in the sewers. Keiji Shibusawa also has close thematic connections with Kiryu, but I'll save talking about him and those more in depth for when I get to the Kiryu section. For now, it's important to note the ways Kuze represents Kiryu's darkest possible ways of dealing with all of his issues as a Yakuza, and how Shibusawa acts more like the Dark Link version of Kiryu himself. All 3 of these guys are the pillars that hold up Sohei Dojima. By the end of Zero, each of those pillars have been toppled. 2 by Kiryu and 1 by Majima. In Kiwami, he dies right away, a lecherous death. He's a man without any honor, and thus he dies dishonorably. In Zero, Dojima is a man with ambition and purpose, and he does any and all things necessary to try and attain the chairman's seat of the Tojo clan board. It's his purpose in life, and it's clear within the board meeting at the end of the game how much of a blow it was to him to lose out on his one chance at advancement. Because of this loss, he likely went on a downward spiral, a spiral of death that would eventually lead him to Yumi and Nishiki. And this scene is much like the meeting of the 5 families in The Godfather, which Vito uses to identify his real enemy, Bartzini. Just like in Yakuza 0, this sets Bartzini down the path towards being killed during the baptism scene. Dojima isn't the only character to fall from grace though. Jun Oda was a man with a hard life, and this made him do dishonorable things, such as selling Makoto and other girls like her to the Korean mafia. It is when he recognizes her on the TV while next to Tachibana that fear begins to take him. His tattoo is the bat, a specter of fear. Bats are associated with the dark and with vampires, monsters of human appearance. While he would never do anything to Tachibana, Oda manipulates Kiryu to put himself in the perfect position to kill Makoto, thereby covering up his transgressions before Tachibana can learn of them. He fails and is killed by Shibusawa right after Kiryu spares him. And this is another important detail to remember. Kiryu spares while Shibusawa kills. Keep that in the back of your mind for the next little while. Makoto and Tachibana are both Chinese-Japanese. Something we sometimes forget about in the West is the way East Asian and other nations have their own types of racism and racial history. While ours is steeped in a connection to slavery and the mistreatment of Native Americans, they are likewise connected to their mistreatment of other people. Yakuza 0 takes place in 1988, meaning that World War II only ended 43 years prior. This means that the grandchildren of people who lived during that time would still have been young in 1988. And that is the history dominating Makoto and Tachibana's early lives. Japan has a long and brutal history with China and Korea. They haven't always been enemies, but within more modern history, things have not been good between them. In 1937, Japan committed a war atrocity known as the Rape of Nanking, which is considered one of the worst wartime atrocities of all time. For a 6-week period in December of that year, Japanese soldiers would torture the civilians of Nanjing. Tachibana and Makoto's grandfather would have known or been exposed to this event, and it denotes the strong dislike between Chinese and Japanese people coming out of World War II. I like the way Yakuza 0 shows how widespread and consistent issues like this are among people. It's easy to lose sight of the broad historical context of a world as large as ours and with as many people as exist. The course of Tachibana and Makoto's lives are influenced by events that happened long before they were born, much in the same way all historical events always impact the people of the present. Math can't quantify the way the past haunts us, but tales like Tachibana's do a good job. And if there's one character more haunted by demons than anyone else, it's Nishikiyama. By 2005, Nishiki would change from being Kiryu's closest friend, ally, and confidant to being his utter enemy. He has a tattoo of a koi fish, eternally at peace. His tattoo isn't filled in though because his legend hasn't finished. There are 3 scenes that really show Nishiki's personal progress over the course of the game. Firstly is when he points a gun at the back of Kiryu's head. He needs to kill his brother in order to absolve his father, but he can't do so. He has to let him go because he's too weak to do what the Yakuza requires of him. The second is when Nishiki and Kiryu cast off their clothes and fight as brothers, the carp and the dragon becoming a yin and yang of annihilation. This scene shows Nishiki's bond with Kiryu and solidifies them as a pair who can stand against all tides. But what happens if the carp and the dragon are separated? What if the dragon were cast out? The third scene is at the conclusion of the fight between Kiryu and Shibusawa. As Kiryu begins to deal the killing blow, Nishiki stops him saying, "Someday, if the time ever comes where you have to cross that line, then I'll cross it with you." I'm glad I played the first 2 hours of Kiwami 4 years ago when I heard this line, because I knew instantly the tragic nature of Kiwami's beginning. Nishiki was there to save Kiryu from crossing that line, but when Nishiki needed Kiryu to save him from killing Dojima, Kiryu wasn't there. Nishiki crossed the line first because his brother wasn't there to help him in the same way he had helped Kiryu all those years ago. And this makes Nishiki's story tragic in the same way Michael's story is tragic. Each is let down by their brothers and set on a path to kill them. Each is a story of tragedy and loss, and each is as amazing as the other. Yakuza 0 is about many things. but one of the main things it is about is the Dragon of Dojima earning his name. Kiryu over the course of the game is beset by conflicting interpretations of what it means to be Yakuza. Kuze is his darker urges and the paths that lead him towards being an evil Yakuza. But more important than Kuze is Keiji Shibusawa. Of the 3 Dojima lieutenants, Shibusawa gets the least amount of airtime, and this is for good reason. He is steeped in mystery, he is stoic, he is calculating, he is just like Kiryu. He solves his problems bereft of overwhelming emotion, just like Kiryu. And just like Kiryu, he is a Dragon of Dojima. In Eastern mythology, dragons are not the villains they are in Western tales. They are wisdom incarnate and godly in nature. That's not to say dragons can't be bad in Eastern contexts, though. Shibusawa and Kiryu are the same and could have become the same man. But Shibusawa gave in to killing and doing anything necessary to rise to the top. He sacrificed his dragon soul for the wealth of the Yakuza. And at the end of this tale, after Kiryu has defeated his demons through Kuze, it is time for him to meet his metaphorical alter ego, the other Dragon of Dojima. They lash out at each other, Shibusawa having the same fighting styles as Kiryu. And what I noticed during this boss fight is the way it becomes much easier if you engage with the mirror matches. With each phase of the fight, Shibusawa and Kiryu move to a different section of the boat, and whatever section they're in seems to be designed around whatever fighting style Shibusawa is using at that moment. This demonstrates the contest of dragons, meeting each other blow for blow, and it also shows Kiryu's growth. He can beat a fully grown dragon on every metric, despite being incomplete himself. It is with this victory that he completes his tattoo. He becomes the Dragon of Dojima, getting into a position where he can guide the Yakuza towards a more honorable future. In a lot of ways, Kiryu's whole story in Yakuza 0 is a moral debate between him and the design of the Yakuza as a concept. Shibusawa states, "Anyone who takes the high road in a world where diligence is answered with indifference is a fool," further adding to this idea by saying, "We write in other people's blood, and I aim to pin my title in yours." Shibusawa's vision of what it means to be Yakuza can't exist for as long as Kiryu does. Likewise, Kiryu's honorable vision is impossible with Shibusawa's. An example of how this is shown in the game is the way these two interact with Oda upon learning he's betrayed them. Kiryu spares Oda, but Shibusawa kills him mercilessly. They are dragons, one inked and one not, and they can't coexist. There can only be one dragon, and Kiryu achieves this by striking down Shibusawa. He is stronger, and he is the one who will guide the future of the Dojima clan. Shibusawa's last words of defeat are Dragon of Dojima, and this is his way of passing the title on to Kiryu. This permits Kiryu to make his own kind of Yakuza, and to be his own kind of dragon. I really like this conflict because it takes all of Kiryu's developments into account and adds a conclusion to the conflict of ideals Kiryu has represented throughout the game. Kiryu is the main character of the franchise, but I don't think he's really the main character of Zero. That title goes to the Mad Dog of Shimano, Goro Majima. I'm a huge Mortal Kombat fan, so whenever a character is named Goro, I expect them to be powerful, and Majima lives up to this expectation. Majima is the most powerful character in the game, and his story is one of an unraveling mental state, and a man gone mad. Just like with Kiryu, there is one specific instance I want to explore with Majima, and that is his last scene with Makoto. Over the course of the game, Majima becomes a demon tamed by the love for a blind girl he was beset upon to kill. Over the course of the game, Majima becomes more and more feral, and this is shown at the end by his choice in clothing. He's a man willing to do anything for Makoto, including letting her go, the hardest thing for a person in love to do. Makoto's only knowledge of Majima's face is a hazy outline. She knows his voice and that he has an eye patch. That is all. In their final scene together, Majima never speaks loud enough for her to hear because she would recognize him in an instant. And his life as a Yakuza is counter to her ability to live free from pain and to achieve peace and happiness. Above all, he wishes to prevent the pain of his life from infecting hers. Tattoos are taboo in Japan, but Majima displays his brazenly. He is completely unhinged, and this is the only image Makoto ever sees of Majima in full clarity. As he walks away, Makoto watches him. And what's that in her eye? Is it realization? Does she mourn a man she doesn't recognize due to his changes, much in the same way Kate mourns Michael at the end of The Godfather?
That Corleone.
When I first finished the game, I was left with one major question. Why is Majima like this? It didn't take me long to come up with an answer. There's a point in Majima's story where Shimano tells him he commanded Majima to kill Makoto because he knew Majima wouldn't be able to go through with it. He predicted all of Majima's moves, manipulating him into doing exactly what would serve Shimano best. Is it strange then that Majima would unravel at the seams and begin acting like a mad dog, a dog that can't be predicted? I posit this to be the case, and when I started Kiwami up after finishing this game, my theory was well rewarded. At the start of Kiwami, Majima is concerned for Kiryu because he sees in Kiryu his former self, the obedient dog. Kiryu's brand of Yakuza fascinates Majima, and as such he wants Kiryu to succeed, going so far as to throw a match against him during Sarah's funeral. Despite all of his challenges and failings, Majima maintained his honor throughout Yakuza 0, which is ironic given his demon tattoo. Maybe, just maybe, not all demons are evil. Or maybe it represents Majima's struggle to overcome his deeper nature. It's something I'm looking forward to understanding more as I make my way deeper into Kiwami. There are two themes I want to take a deeper look at before going into the conclusion of this video. At the beginning of this video, I made the claim that Yakuza 0 is the godfather of Japanese games, and over the course of this video, I've made comparisons here and there to show what I mean. My thesis is one of comparing quality, and there are two constant themes throughout Yakuza 0 that prove my point more. The first theme is of fathers not being who their son thinks they are, of a disconcordance between king and heir to the throne. Kiryu thinks Kazuma is a man of complete virtue, but there are subtle things in Yakuza 0 that make me think Kazuma might not be as honorable as Kiryu thinks, such as when Shibusawa claims Kazuma built up his empire by being a hitman. The way Kazuma is able to connive and plot from prison denotes a brutality of his characterization that Nishiki comes to embody within the first 2 hours of Kiwami. And this theme shows up in The Godfather too. Michael has an image of his father, but as the film progresses, Michael becomes disillusioned with his father's wisdom. And in this way, both pieces of crime fiction are Bildungsromans on the spiritual side of that literary trope. Each are on quests of philosophy, with Kiryu questing to become his own type of Yakuza, and Michael becoming his own type of Godfather. These two characters are inversions of one another too. Kiryu becomes more honorable in his crusade, whereas Michael becomes more brutal and dishonorable, going so far as to kill his sister's husband in retribution for the murder of his brother Sonny, only to kill his older brother Fredo near the conclusion of the second film. Both are thematic masterpieces, and the major differences between them are matters of media form and an East versus West design philosophy. Yakuza 0 is a stroke of genius and deserves its status as one of the finest video games I've ever played. If you watch this whole video for a recommendation, this is it. This is the best game I've reviewed on the channel so far, and it gets the Rayl Deal seal of approval from me. This game is great in a vacuum and begs you to play Kiwami afterwards. At this point, I can't say whether the whole franchise is worth playing or not, but this game on its own is. I'm playing through this whole franchise this year as a part of my Year of Yakuza content rollout. If you'd like someone to talk about the games with, join me on this journey. Next month, I'll be playing through Kiwami, and I would always be happy to have someone to chat about video games with. In these Yakuza reviews, I want to take a moment to do some bookkeeping. At the end of the year, I plan to make a top 10 Yakuza Like a Dragon characters list, and I want to keep a working record of my top 10 at the end of each review. Currently, my list is as follows. This list is going to shift over the course of my videos. What's your favorite character from this game? I'd love to hear all about it. I have top 100 lists for each decade of gaming from the 1980s to now, and whenever I finish a game, I've got to decide if it should make the list. Naturally, it gets harder to get on the list as I play more and more games. The 2010s is a stacked top 100 right now, and it's not often a game has a remote chance of getting onto it. Dragon's Dogma, the last game I reviewed, didn't make it. Will Yakuza 0 make the list? As of right now, it will, knocking Mario Kart 8 off. I can't say whether this game will stay on the list by the time I publish my final draft of it, but it is a strong contender at this time. I mark games on my top 100 as either red or blue to denote their status on the list, with red being a game that is locked in and blue being a game that is cuttable. Yakuza 0 is going in the cuttable category, but not at the top of that list. There are 30 or so games ahead of it on the chopping block, so whenever I finish that list, I might very well be talking about my love for this game once more. I don't know if other Yakuza games are going to make this list, but they would have to be as good as 0 as a baseline to have a chance. And that's the video, guys. What did you think? Let me know in the comments section below, and if you'd like to see more Yakuza content from me, make sure to subscribe and ding that notification bell. I plan to make 2 videos for each game in the franchise, and I'll be doing a review like this for Kiwami in February. If you liked the video, please like and share, and if you have a moment right now, consider checking out one of my videos on screen. Whatever you choose to do, have an awesome day, gamers.